You're listening to the HR Mixtape, your podcast with the perfect mix of practical advice, thought-provoking interviews, and stories that just hit different so that work doesn't have to feel, well, like work. Now, your host, Shari Simpson.
Joining me today is Leah Marone, psychotherapist, speaker, and corporate mental wellness consultant. Leah draws on 20 years of clinical experience, thousands of therapy sessions, and work as a Yale clinical instructor to help organizations reduce burnout, strengthen boundaries, and build resilient, high-performing teams. Leah, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm very, very fascinated about what we're going to talk about today, but I want to start with the role of HR in general and the space that HR professionals live in. You know, I have been lucky enough in my career to do everything from HR departments of one to big organizations, to recruitment, training development, payroll benefits, kind of the whole thing. And in every one of those roles, there was a certain sense of ownership I had in delivering to my employees and to my business leaders. That puts HR in a really unique position to feel burnout, I think a little bit more, slightly more than a lot of other people in the organization. I'm curious, with the work that you've done, is that what you're seeing too?
I am. And that was I love how you kind of pinpointed that there's this pool, of like, we're not just taking care of this group. We're also taking care of this group as we take care of ourselves. And then, God forbid, something unpredictable happens or something goes off the rails. And then there's all these other layers. So you're absolutely right. And the interesting thing about HR, and I'm going to make a generalization, because what I've found is that people that gravitate towards that profession and even just helping professions in general have high EQ, have, this drive to serve, to help, and, tend to have higher levels of compassion and empathy, which are wonderful things. But sometimes this, this strength, this gift can kind of lead us to take false ownership of things that aren't necessarily ours, or kind of insert or take over, structure, solve and fix when it's not necessarily ours. And this is not only happening in their professional roles, but personal. And you can see where this recipe, if we're not aware of it, and we're not kind of coming in as more of that supporter and, kind of still helping, but not scooping in and being like, well, I need to come in and alleviate this person or fix this for this person. Because if I don't, then I'm going to actually question what kind of professional I am, or what kind of partner I am, or teammate I am. And so there's a lot of internal conflict that happens. And I do think that right there is a very hard balance and flow to find. And a lot of people aren't even aware of that and kind of the internal conflicts that they have that are feeding this compassion fatigue and burnout.
And the reason I started with that question is because I want to dive in to the book that you have that actually launches today. It's called Serial Fixer. And let's dive into a little bit about what that means. And I know specifically for HR professionals.
Yeah. Well, even the subtitle, Break Free from the Habit of Solving Other People's Problems. I think that says a lot right there. And, when we find ourselves in this kind of cycle of serial fixing, it does come, Shari, from a good place. But it is kind of this drive and this urgency that generally, is ego-driven. It's from our internal critics, our internal pleasers that are kind of pushing us to be in these roles where we are immediately assuming, fixing, solving, and we're not meeting people and situation necessarily where it's at. You can see where these create these I like to refer to them as micro codependencies in the workplace and in our families and in our friend groups. And we're kind of the one that we have the privilege of, knowing the information, being the person that people go to. We like this. This makes us feel productive and connected, which is not a bad thing. But you can see that when we're not aware, the whole idea of just consistent self-care goes out the window because we have these internal parts of us that are like, if you do that, if you're not available, if you just put yourself first, then you're probably acting, out of selfishness, or you're probably not the best HR professional that you can be. And so Serial Fixer, it really talks about just obviously what it is and these cycles we find ourselves in. But I go into depth about the psychology behind these parts, these drivers. And you'll use a lot of internal family systems models. And it is just about not just fighting burnout with the Band-Aids and the little things that make us feel good. Those are wonderful. But I want to help people get to the root and really come out of that book with a higher level of self-awareness and self-connection, and not compromise at all on their compassion and empathy and, drive to connect and help, but do it in a way where they are consistently still in the equation.
As you were explaining that, I thought of a couple of things that I've experienced in my personal life and in my, professional career. And it's funny, I was thinking about, it's boys, I raised boys. And so I'm the only female in the house. And the trope about boys can't see things when it's right in front of them is very true in my experience. Not all men, obviously, but my children, have done that. They've opened the fridge or they've been looking for keys or something. And it's such a simple example, but there is this innate feeling in me that's like, well, I have to go find it. Like, they're never going to be able to find it. I have to go find it. I have to go solve this problem. And I think about that in my HR career as well. So many people come into HR, like you said, because they have this passion for serving people. And those who are a little bit more tenure in the year, we're like, oh, that's cute. Baby HR thinks that they're going to, help people, because we get so burned out and we have so many kind of negative experiences that it does lead us to sitting in this kind of serial fixer mode. How do we start to, one, identify that we're there, and two, get out of it or don't sit in it for an extended period of time?
Yes. And this is where I really try and hone in on kind of my support, don't solve model, right? And the first step, and really, is collecting data, right, on yourself. We don't do this enough. We're not kind of checking in, we're not aware. But I think just even a simple step that everyone can do right out of the gate is just start to pay attention, not every exchange and every interaction, but just start to pay attention professionally and personally, the role that you tend to place yourself in conversations and exchanges. If someone comes to you with some sort of hurdle, problem, distress, whatever it may be, is your first instinct to start to unravel, to start to kind of fix, to soothe? And again, this comes from a good place, but you can see where that initial inclination to solve, to fix, to like, well, I'll just send them an email. Oh, you do have too much on your plate. Let me go ahead and take this off. Let me do this. Let me do this. And that, again, wonderful. But you can see where we catalog these things as human. We're like, oh, she's available for that. He's available for that. I don't have to do this. There's nothing pressing here. This is, as humans, how we assess where we can, filtrate our energy. And so I think it's really a matter of, when you show up to exchanges and conversations right out of the gate, we have to get better at validating first. And what I mean by that is not necessarily agreeing, but showing that person that we are working hard to decode the message that they're trying to share with us, non-verbally and verbally, and that we're going to meet them where they're at. So this, again, some people are like, well, I don't got time for that. But you do, because what you're doing is you're creating this balanced exchange, and you're breaking that serial fixing habit of jumping in, fixing, solving, trying to, soothe them so that, number one, you feel like, okay, that's done, check that off. But they're going to be here tomorrow doing the same thing. And I think that we feed into this urgency, we feed into this pull of like, if I'm not solving this, if I'm not fixing, if I'm not doing this for this person, then I'm not doing my job. When in reality, we are neglecting people professionally and personally of getting their own repetitions in, of getting their own problem solving and growth in, whether they're your children or they're people that you're leading. And out of the gate, this does take a little more time, but it is strategic. It is helping people develop. It is helping people get their own space and developing their own role and internally gaining self-trust. And when we jump in and we fix and we solve and we're like, well, do this, or this is what I would do, it's creating tons of imbalances in all of the relationships that we have in our lives.
It makes me think about how bad we are at setting boundaries. I feel like that's like the number one thing that I've had to really work on as an HR professional. I had a leader once that shared with me that she doesn't answer text messages for 10 minutes. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, the idea of like the little red dot on my phone for 10 minutes. But I started to practice it, and it was amazing, the space that it provided for the people who were texting me to solve their own problems. Because most of the time it wasn't an emergency. It wasn't even an emergency for them. So that was a really great tip that I got along my career. The other thing that I've started to do over the last year is block out my Fridays. Now, not everybody can do that. I understand that. I understand that's a luxury that I have. But it has really helped me take some of that time and focus on my work and the thinking that I need. Overall, how do we get to a place where we can set better boundaries for us as HR so we're not constantly getting inundated with those interruptions? And we know we kind of sit in that space where we have to react to the unexpected, but there's a way to do it where we're creating boundaries at the same time.
You're absolutely right. And I love that you shared that about just that pause with text messages, because we all grew up in different households. We all grew up with different models. And some of us grew up with serial fixers where, we didn't get a chance, unfortunately, to develop some of those muscles. And so everything was urgent. And we're constantly assessing, who can we go to untangle my ball of yarn? And typically it's people with high levels of compassion and empathy. And so you're right, that pause that, just gives a chance for them to keep ownership, have a little bit of logic, maybe seep into that emotional and that urgent. You're still there. You're still around. But it's hard sometimes for people to assess, and HR professionals and leaders to assess what is urgent and what's not. But that practice is a wonderful way, even challenging the open door policy. Oh, I have an open door policy. I'm available all the time. And it's like, how's that working for you? Or is it and what are you really trying to do with that? And I think if you have someone that you're leading that is constantly coming in to have you put out fires, the phrase, and if you're multitasking, if you're doing something and you really need to focus and people are coming in and interrupting, number one, that's so cognitively taxing. And that creates this just exhaustion. But even playing with the phrase like, Tyler, I can see what you have to say is really important. And I want to give you my full attention. Let me finish this and let's find a time this afternoon, or let me come find you and circle back so that I can give you my full attention because I want to hear what you have to say. You're validating, you're not feeding in. Tyler's going to go away and probably be more prepared with questions, what he needs, rather than just like, this is a mess, and kind of throw you this fire. And so those types of practices and generating that calm and composure and like, this is yours, I'm here to help, is wonderful. And so I think kind of, to your point and just even your question, that mindfulness around how are we operating? What kind of culture are we standing behind or fueling? And are we truly empowering people and helping them kind of, again, gain that confidence as a professional? Or are we kind of creating these micro codependencies where people are just kind of bombarding us and hoping that we, again, untangle their ball of yarn?
It's so amazing. I love that ball of yarn analogy and linking it back to, potentially how you were raised. My parents definitely are fixers. Just listening to you describe it, and everything was urgent, everything as small as the dishes have to be done right this second, and that definitely sets you up for a particular way of looking at the world. In your book, you write about inner critic. I'd love for you to tackle that a little bit with us and how we can tune into that critical voice to actually help us make better choices instead of, draining our energy.
Yeah. Great question. I do. I go into, external boundaries, but more importantly, in order to be able to maintain and create external ones, we kind of go into internal first. And so I really kind of pick apart different parts within us that tend to be very powerful, like our inner critic, our inner pleaser, our inner rescuer, right? And how those parts of us, it's very similar to the movie Inside Out, right? Those parts. And that's, again, kind of the therapeutic modality that I use in internal family systems a lot to kind of help me with the book and the framework. But your critic is, a lot of us have a very fierce inner critic. And a lot of us try very hard to shove that down, to ignore it, to distract ourselves from it. It's kind of that critical voice within us that, can be very unpleasant, create angst, kind of these anxious thought spirals, leave us too much in the futuristic thinking or past thinking, But really, in reality, this critic is a protective property. It's like a bodyguard, and it is there for a good reason. And the thing that we misstep or mistake is that we try very hard to suppress and get rid of these parts. And we're judgmental of like, why am I like this? What is wrong with me? Is everyone else like this? And yeah, most of us are. And so the thing though, the shift is really understanding and appreciating and aligning with these parts of us, because a lot of these parts that are very, protective in nature came to fruition and were created when we were younger to protect us from not feeling something that we wanted to feel. And so I think it really reframes how to understand, how to work, how to align, how to soothe those parts of us that are very fear-driven and anxiety-driven. And that's where we run into those conflicts as parents, professionals, partners of like, well, if I don't do that, am I a good leader? Like, do I care enough? People are probably going to think I'm not passionate enough, that I'm kind of out, that I'm, lazy, that I'm this. And so our critic, is like pushing us like, you don't want to be categorized as anything negative. You don't want people to like judge you because of this. And you can see where that gets in the way of boundaries, external ones, right? Even like setting up things for self-care. Like, I'm going to start working out. I'm going to leave the office at 5, or I'm going to do this. I'm going to get up early. And, our critics in our ear that morning of like, well, if you don't check your email, people are going to actually wonder. They're going to wonder if you're actually working today, or you're just laying on your couch, or, they're really used to you firing back pretty quick. And so what's that going to say about you? Oh yeah, I'll just save that workout for later. It's really not going to make that big of a deal if I wait. So you can see how these parts sabotage how we set boundaries. And so I think it's so critical. We're beyond the like, let's just put a Band-Aid on it. Let's just go take a walk and take a bubble bath and, just have these little mental health hours. No. We can do better. And we need to be more consistent, and we need to go deeper with what's truly going on so that we can align and soothe and not just search for the Band-Aids.
How do we go about discovering what that is for each of us? So, I've done some work to try to understand flow states for myself during the day. So I know that if I have project, heavy thinking, brain intensive work, I'm going to be most productive between the hours of 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., right? It's like a 2-hour window. I know that's my sweet spot. And I leave all my kind of creative, fun thinking meetings for later in the day. But that took me a really, really long time to figure out, many, many, many years. How do we jumpstart that? How do we get into really investigating ourselves for some of those things that we know either our critic is holding us back from, or, what we think we're supposed to show up as, so that we can have a better flow and continue to show up the way we want to? Because ultimately, that's really what we're trying to do, is still show up the way we want to show up, but in a healthy way with healthy boundaries and not putting ourselves in this, serial fixer mode.
Right. And I think, with how much we use data, which rightfully so, to kind of keep track of everything, especially in our professional roles, like we need to gather more data on ourselves. And like you said, it took you a while to really understand, like, this is when I'm firing on all cylinders in this way, and I need to capitalize on that. It took you many times probably to pause and reflect and access some of the data that you were collecting, checking in. And so I think that's where we were misstepping. And the cool thing is like self check-ins and gathering data, it doesn't have to be this huge elaborate thing. Like capitalizing just on our transitions during the day, when we're walking from one room to the next, when we're driving to work, when we're doing soccer pickups or whatever we're doing, we have dozens of transitions throughout the day. And just using some of those as moments where you can be like, where am I at? How am I doing? What's resonating with me? What's not? Where have my thoughts been? There's not, you have to refrain from judgment, which is tough. That's the critic. But you also have to think about, like, I'm just gathering data. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to necessarily go overanalyze and fix and overthink. I'm gathering data that will help me figure out what works for me and what doesn't. So when you have a week that is incredibly taxing, which we all do, and you're being pulled in all directions, you may know, like, in order to prevent an emotional hangover, I need to carve out some time to do X, Y, or Z. And my critic's going to be yelling at me like, do you really need that? You really probably should clean out the garage. I mean, it's been 2 years now. Come on. But that's where you have to soothe and kind of anticipate, like, I'm going to meet both these parts in the middle. And if I don't do this, I know I'm going to pay for it. So it's really having these almost conversations with yourself as you're collecting data. And that's really how lasting change starts.
No break. Love all of those great examples. And if you're working fully remote and you're listening, build in those transitions. You know, I know that's not the point of this discussion, but it is very easy to log in and then you're on 24/7, literally, because you're remote. And so you don't think about it, but build in those transitions and those stop times for your day. You don't have to log in after dinner. Maybe you want to, maybe you've decided that flow works for you, because I know some people who do that and it's actually very, very productive for them, and it doesn't add stress and they still can show up the way they want to. But for me, I have to build in those transitions. So I kind of know if I've been sitting here for like an hour and a half with no breaks, no, standing up, it's like, I gotta get up. I gotta go take out the dogs or do something for that mental transition break. As we wrap our conversation up, Leah, what do you think about for the future in this space? What are you seeing is kind of the next hurdle that we're going to be talking about when it comes to HR and some of our serial fixer mentalities?
Oh my gosh. We could talk all day about that, right? I mean, I think the biggest thing is, and a lot of you I know are probably already doing this, but I think in order, again, if we use that ball of yarn analogy and like, you're prone to just catching everybody's ball of yarn and trying to untangle it, like think about keeping that ball of yarn with them and pulling on some threads for them every now and again, but they still keep it. But I think in just the profession of HR in general, and just even leadership in general, like we have to do a better job of asking people, like, how do you know, or what happens? What alarm bells do you when you're like at a high level of stress? Or, you are asking questions that seem invasive, but they're not. What you're doing is you're actually encouraging this culture of, be aware of yourself. You're in charge of your mental health. But like, it's helpful to have these conversations of like, how are you taking care of yourself? What ways do you tend to be, recover? What's helpful for you in terms of recovery? What boundaries are you working on? When are you able to access your grit and resilience? What motivates you? Again, what alarm bells go off to let you know, like you're reaching a high level of stress that, isn't sustainable? Like those types of questions and check-ins where you're keeping the ownership with that person is a very proactive, very wellness-driven culture where it's like, we're going to talk about this. We're not having therapy sessions every time we meet. That's not what we're doing in the professional, landscape. But those questions of like, even during the interview process, what do you know about yourself and kind of your rhythms when it comes to stress? How do you recover? What are some boundaries, or when you think of boundaries, what do you think of? Like those are so helpful and modern questions, and we're there. We're ready.
I love that. Well, Leah, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to jump on the podcast and talk to me about your book and this really important topic.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find show notes and links at thehrmixtape.com. Come back often and please subscribe, rate, and review.